Welcome to Sonara's Deep Dive.
Okay, so I want you to imagine something. Picture a massive fortress, but it's not just built on a mountain. It's carved out of the mountain, right out of a sheer rock spine, way up in the Al-Borz range in Persia.
The eagle's nest, Alamut.
Exactly. And in the late 11th century, this place wasn't just a military base. It was the heart of a secret revolutionary faith. And it was run with a discipline that was, frankly, terrifying.
It had to be. Under its leader, Ḥasan-i Ṣabbāḥ, Alamut was this crucible of austerity. I mean, there was no frivolity at all.
None.
The rules were incredibly strict, all rooted in the outward letter of the law, the Sharhi, which is interesting because despite their esoteric core, they followed that outward law with just uncompromising discipline.
Which the sources say was absolutely necessary for them to survive in what was a violently hostile world. So hold that picture in your mind. The society of, intellectual rebels, but living under the absolute strictest external law you can imagine. Now, let's jump forward to August 8th, 1164. That rigid discipline, that strict adherence to the Zahir, the outward form, had been in place for decades.
Decades.
But on this one day, Ḥasan-i Ṣabbāḥ's successor, Imam Ḥasan II, he steps out onto this platform they'd built in the courtyard at Alamut.
And you just have to imagine the atmosphere. It must have been absolutely electric, built on years of this intense religious observance and constant political tension.
And then Ḥasan II, who the faithful see as the living descendant of the prophet, announces the great resurrection, the Qiyamah. This was just so radical. He wasn't talking about a resurrection in some distant future. He was declaring that salvation had arrived.
No.
Right then, right there.
Yeah, now. And with that declaration, the rigid external laws, the Zahir that had governed every single aspect of their lives, were symbolically lifted. They were sort of dissolved by the spiritual light of the Imam.
It's a monumental shift.
Yeah.
A spiritual and a physical fusion all at once.
And the celebration that followed was, for the time, just shocking. A kind of symbolic banquet, like a mystical Eucharist, where men and women who would normally be segregated, gathered together to celebrate.
They were basically proclaiming their immediate entry into paradise. Not something you earn later, but something you realize in the moment through the inner truth.
The Okokah, revealed by the Imam.
And that single event, that dramatic, incredibly dangerous moment in 1164, it just perfectly encapsulates the entire philosophical core of the Nizārī Ismāʿīlī tradition.
It really does. It's the definitive shift from the outer form of religion to the inner spiritual reality, the blin.
That's the central mystery, isn't it? A faith built on secret knowledge, on spiritual rebirth, and on this absolute certainty that true guidance shines from a living spiritual leader.
And it's a tradition that you really need to deep dive to get. You have to push past all the historical noise, especially those infamous legends of the hashish-fueled assassins.
Oh, absolutely. That's why today we are deep diving into the sources you shared on the Nizārī Ismāʿīlī tradition. We're going to trace its lineage, explore its rituals of transformation all over the world, and try to understand how this ancient, really sophisticated wisdom survives centuries of persecution to become this dynamic modern faith. Our mission is to give you access to this powerful, often hidden knowledge, to let you trace that light that shines just beneath the surface of the world. Okay, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
To really start to understand the Ismāʿīlī tradition, we have to start where they do, which is with the very structure of reality. Their whole worldview is based on this profound duality, these two concepts, the Zahir and the Batin.
And this distinction isn't just, academic. It's the hinge that the entire faith turns on. The Zahir is the exoteric. It's the apparent, the surface layer.
Okay, so that's the literal meaning of the Quran, the religious laws, the public rituals.
Exactly. The external communal duties. In short, the Shardisa. It's the scaffolding of the faith, what you see when you look at Islam from the outside.
And if the Zahir is the shell,
the Ban is the pearl inside. It's the esoteric, the hidden meaning, the true spiritual reality that's concealed just beneath that visible surface. This is the akuku, the ultimate essential truth.
I like that analogy, the shell and the pearl.
Or think of it like a grand cathedral. The Zahir is the physical stuff, the stones, the mortar, the walls you can see, the rules about when you can enter.
Right.
But the bun is the invisible force that shaped it, the spiritual blueprint, the theological purpose, the sacred geometry, that feeling of awe the building is designed to give you.
So one can't really exist without the other.
You can't. And the religious path isn't about throwing away the outer law. It's about penetrating through it to get to the source.
So that moment of Qiyamah we talked about when the Imam lifted the Zahir, that wasn't an act of anarchy.
Not at all. It was a demonstration, a statement that the community had achieved the bun so completely that the Zahir was no longer necessary as a tool for them.
Nice.
That's the synthesis. For Ismāʿīlīs, the ultimate value of religion is in that dynamic harmony between the two layers. The outer form manifests the inner truth, but the inner truth is the source of all valid outer expressions. The goal is to move past just following the rules and actually pierce the veil.
Okay, which brings up the obvious question.
Yeah.
How do you pierce the veil? How does a person go from the literal external understanding to that hidden true reality?
That is the whole function of ta'wil. This is the authorized, allegorical, or symbolic interpretation that's required to unveil the bone. It's a really sophisticated process, a kind of spiritual hermeneutics.
So it's a journey.
It's an intellectual and a spiritual journey. It actively pulls the meaning of revelation from the world of phenomenon, what we can see and read literally, to the world of noumenon, the ultimate transcendent reality behind it all.
Can you give us a concrete example to make it less abstract?
Sure, certainly. Take a literal command in the Quran, like the instruction to perform the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. The Zahir instruction is physical. You travel to the Kaaba, you circumambulate, you perform the rites. Through ta'wil, the Imam or Da'iya might reveal that the bun meaning of Hajj is the soul's journey towards God.
I see.
Or maybe it's the individual's continuous striving to circle the divine light of the Imam, who is the spiritual Kaaba. So the literal physical journey becomes a metaphor for a constant inward spiritual effort.
It sounds like an extremely demanding kind of spiritual science. And the sources say this whole process, this passage from Zahir to Aqwaqa through Tawal, it leads directly to a spiritual rebirth.
And that rebirth is the goal. It results in marifa, which is gnosis, a profound spiritual understanding. This isn't just blind faith. It's a deep, internalized knowledge of the truth of God, the soul, and the cosmos.
And what's fascinating is the intellectual flexibility that this requires.
How so?
Well, this drive to synthesize, to get to the truth beyond just the literal words, it led the Ismāʿīlīs to be incredibly adaptive intellectually. They brought in elements from everywhere.
Right from the Greeks.
From the Greeks, yeah. Aristotelian logic, Neoplatonic ideas about the emanation of the divine, even Gnostic ideas about hidden knowledge. And they wove all of it into their Islamic framework.
So they weren't isolationists at all.
Not in the slightest. They were intellectual synthesizers. The goal was always the synergy of the intellect, the akal, and the spirit, the ruth, to find the final truths. That's the hallmark of a really dynamic intellectual tradition.
But if the entire spiritual path depends on correctly interpreting these deep, hidden meanings, then the guide becomes absolutely critical.
Exactly. Human reason alone, even a highly trained mind, could just wander off into error.
And that is the foundational argument for the necessity of the living imamte, the guiding light. The Imam is central because he is the divinely guided, living successor of Ali, and he is believed to have the perfect, infallible understanding of both the Zahir and the burn.
So he's not just a figurehead, not even a supreme cleric. The sources call him the Mu'allim, the sole authoritative interpreter.
Right, which brings us to the doctrine of Ta'lim, which means authoritative instruction. Ḥasan-i Ṣabbāḥ really popularized this during the Alamut period.
And what's the core idea there?
The doctrine basically says that human reason, while it's essential for science and philosophy, is ultimately insufficient when you're trying to grasp the ultimate truths about God and reality. Reason can only lead to endless, inconclusive speculation.
So without the Imam, all the theological debates just go in circles and spiritual progress just grinds to a halt.
Exactly. You need the infallible, living teacher to impart the true inner knowledge. He acts as the proof of God on earth, the hujjah, making sure that divine guidance is continuous and relevant for every new age. He's the bridge.
The bridge between the finite human mind and infinite divine wisdom.
Yes. And this authority is described in this breathtaking theological language as nur, or divine light.
The Imam is the manifestation of that divine light on earth.
A concept with roots right in the Quran. For a devoted Ismāʿīlī, the highest spiritual quest-attaining unity, or tawhid, is ultimately the same thing as the individual soul embracing the nur of the Imam. It's a continuous living reality.
Which means God's revelation didn't just stop when the Quran was compiled.
No, it continues. In a way that guides the faithful through the challenges of each new historical era.
That's what allows the tradition to be both ancient and, at the same time, profoundly modern and adaptive.
It gives you both. The stability of an ancient truth and the flexibility to apply it to a constantly changing world. It creates a system of dynamic certitude.
Right. If the foundation is a living, infallible guide, there's always a clear path forward no matter what's happening externally. Okay, that deep dive into the Bund Doctrine gives us the whole intellectual framework. But to survive all the turbulence around them, this tradition needed more than just ideas. It needed an organization.
An organization capable of delivering that secret knowledge, often under the threat of death.
Right. I mean, when we look at the timeline, this faith was almost continuously persecuted. First the Ḥabbāsids, then the Seljuqs, and then, of course, shattered by the Mongols.
And that esoteric doctrine we just discussed, the sheer depth of it, explains why they needed this highly organized, often clandestine network, the dawah, to manage and transmit this powerful and, frankly, dangerous knowledge.
The dawah was this secret network of missionaries, right?
Yes, operating in deep secrecy to spread the Ismaili interpretation of Islam. And this structure made sure that the delicate, esoteric truths were only revealed to those who were truly ready to receive them. It protected both the knowledge and the initiates.
And the most important agents in this network were the da'is, the missionaries. And we should be very clear, these were not simple street preachers. The sources are emphatic about their training.
Oh, they were intellectual polymaths. They're described as learned philosophers, theologians, skilled political emissaries. They were trained in these specialized institutions, like the famous Dar al-Hikmah in Fatimid, Cairo.
Which was basically a state-sponsored university for Ismaili thought and science.
Essentially, yes. A successful Da'i had to master multiple languages, understand local customs and religions, and know all the arguments of their rivals, both Islamic and non-Islamic.
And their mission wasn't about mass conversion. It was about personalized, guided enlightenment.
Yes, their approach was very much like the intense teacher-student relationship you find in Sufism. The Da'i was the spiritual guide, the murshid, fostering this deep personal bond with the student, the murid.
And the doctrine even formalized this relationship in a really beautiful way.
It did. The Da'i was often seen as the spiritual mother, the one who guides, nurtures, and prepares the disciple for knowledge. And the Imam was the spiritual father, the source of that knowledge. The Da'i's job was to guide the seeker toward recognizing the living Imam.
This careful, nurturing process is a sharp contrast to the lowest, but definitely the most notorious rank in the organization, the fidā'i.
The fidā'i, it means devotee, or one who sacrifices himself. These were the specialized operatives, and they were rigorously trained not just in combat, but in disguise, languages, and the precise execution of these high-risk missions.
And to the outside world, they became the ultimate symbol of Nizārī political resistance.
These acts were incredibly dramatic, designed for maximum psychological impact, targeted assassinations, often in public, where the operative made no attempt to escape, like the famous strike against the Seljuk vizier Nizām al-Mulk in 1092.
An event that sent shockwaves across the entire Middle East.
Absolutely. Nizām al-Mulk wasn't just some politician. He was the architect of the Seljuk Sunni state. His death by a lone operative with a dagger in a public square, it showed that no one, no matter how powerful, was safe from the Nizārī mission.
And Nizārīs saw these acts not as murder, but as a kind of strategic defensive jihad. Righteous retribution to deter persecution and protect their sanctuaries.
And the sources are very clear on this. The devotees were motivated by a profound ideological commitment. They saw martyrdom as a guaranteed immediate path to paradise.
Which brings us to the dark shadow that's followed this group for centuries, perpetuated by Crusader chroniclers and travelers like Marco Polo.
The infamous assassin legends.
The stories are just lurid. The training legend, the paradise legend, and of course the hashish legend.
The narrative is that the masters would drug young recruits with hashish, take them to a secret garden, a man-made paradise with wine, honey, beautiful companions, and then drug them again and take them out.
And the Grand Master would then tell them that only absolute obedience and martyrdom would get them back to that paradise they just experienced.
It's a stunning piece of propaganda, masterfully crafted, but historically completely unfounded.
Right. The very word hashashin, where we get assassin, wasn't literal. It was a slur used by their enemy.
Exactly. It meant something like rabble or low-class troublemakers. It was an insult that Western writers just took literally and then built this whole fantasy around.
And the reality at Alamut completely contradicts it.
Directly contradicts it. As we said, under Ḥasan-i Ṣabbāḥ, life was marked by extreme, even brutal austerity. He executed 2 of his own sons for minor infractions, 1 for drinking wine. This is not an environment where you're running a drug-fueled pleasure garden for recruits.
So the real motivating factor was
intense ideological indoctrination, group solidarity, and a deep belief in the spiritual guarantee offered by the Imam, not hallucinogens.
their courage was spiritual, not chemical.
Precisely. They were fanatically devoted because they truly believed they were agents of the divine will, protecting the one true spiritual path. No drugs were needed for that level of devotion.
That focus on survival and secrecy became even more critical after the Mongols just shattered the Nizārī state in 1256. They were scattered, their libraries burned, their leaders forced into hiding.
And this is where the ancient, crucial practice of taqiyya, or precautionary dissimulation, basically saved the entire tradition. With their infrastructure gone, the communities had to hide in plain sight to survive centuries of persecution.
And they did this mainly by adopting the cloak of Islamic mysticism.
By embracing the outward appearance of Sufism, it was an incredibly intelligent strategy.
Because there was already so much common ground?
A deep philosophical common ground. A focus on the banani, or esoteric interpretation, the need for a spiritual guide, the value of the inner journey over dry external law. By adopting the Sufi garb, they kept their core identity while hiding their allegiance to the Imam.
Which meant a complete shift in their public terminology.
A wholesale shift. The Imam became the murshid, the spiritual master. Followers were murid, disciples. The community leadership took the title of pir, or Sufi saint. The literature from this period is so saturated with Sufi terms, it's almost impossible for an outsider to tell a Nizārī community from a local Sufi order.
And beyond Sufism, they also adopted the rituals of other Shia groups to blend in.
Yes. In places like Persia, they started observing rituals in the fashion of the 12 Rishis, the dominant branch. This dual strategy of conformity allowed them to maintain their internal cohesion and their secret allegiance to their imams. It's the ultimate lesson that the true spiritual reality, the banin, can endure anything as long as the outward form, the zahir, is flexible enough to adapt.
It's just remarkable to see how that esoteric belief and the need for survival translated into these incredibly specific, culturally adapted ceremonies all over the world.
It really is.
This tradition, even with its centralized leadership, it manifests in these diverse rituals of transformation and passage in places as far apart as West Africa, Central Asia, and the Indian subcontinent.
And these rituals are the living proof of the Ismāʿīlī ethos. The zahir, the outer form, it bends to a local culture, it embraces local symbols, but the spiritual purpose is always channeled back to the core Bani truths and allegiance to the imamate.
They're bridges between the visible and the invisible.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's start in West Africa, with the initiation rites in some Ismāʿīlī communities in Guinea. This seems to focus so intensely on the passage to adulthood and hardening the spirit against fear.
It's a complex process, and it demands real fortitude. In many Islamic traditions, circumcision is done shortly after birth. But here, it's postponed until a boy is between 12 and 14, right as he's about to take on adult responsibilities.
So the whole process is a structured encounter with fear.
Yes. And I find the preliminary part with the mythical presence Khandan to be particularly fascinating.
It sets the stage, creates this atmosphere of the occult.
Khandan is this frightening, fear-inducing mythical presence that the young initiates have to conceptually confront. It sets a psychological boundary, teaching the boys that the adult world has real fears and dangers that have to be faced, not run from.
A transition from the protected world of childhood to the exposed world of manhood.
Exactly. And the main trial is known as the Ceremony of Lions. Yes, the boys are taken out to a sacred, secluded spot for the night, and they're surrounded by these terrifying noises, roars that sound like actual lions. The sources call it a test, a training in hardship, a rite. It's designed to strengthen the mental and moral will.
And what elevates this beyond just a local custom is how it's deliberately timed with a major Islamic observance.
The timing is crucial. The ceremony often coincides with the end of Ramadan, the month of rigorous fasting. Ramadan itself is a supreme test of human will. So by linking the initiation, the symbolic confrontation with fear and the physical pain, with the ritual of fasting, the whole thing is geared towards strengthening the will to handle the fears and traumas of adult life.
So the end of the trial isn't just a physical change, it's a spiritual victory.
Right. It all culminates the next day with the feast of Eid al-Fitr. The shedding of blood in the rite, the endurance of fear, the discipline of the fast. It all leads to this shared moment of celebration, of triumph, and the beginning of new life.
A powerful example of a local Zahir being absorbed and elevated by the Ismāʿīlī bond.
Perfectly put.
Okay, now let's go halfway around the world, to the Indian subcontinent and East Africa, for a ceremony of unity and allegiance. The Gapai ritual.
Gapai. The name comes from the Sanskrit words for a vessel, ga, and a dais, pa. This was established centuries ago as a necessary rite of passage for the widespread conversion of Hindu communities to the Ismāʿīlī tradition. It was a ritual mechanism to affirm the new social and religious order.
And the central element here is the sacred water, the ābbāsids.
The water of healing, yes. And its preparation is so rich in symbolism, all designed to link the local community to the highest sources of Islamic sanctity.
How so?
Well, water is placed in the ga, and this water is often enriched with a few drops from the holy well of Zamzam in Mecca, or maybe mixed with a bit of clay dust from Karbala, a sacred site for all Shia Muslims. The water and the vessels are ritually cleansed with prayers and incense.
So that act of mixture instantly makes the water sacred and connects the local rite directly to the global authority of the Imam in Shia history.
Absolutely. And the initiation itself involves this dramatic, symbolic transition. Converts would publicly give up the janoi, the sacred thread worn by Hindus, symbolizing the shedding of their old identity.
And then they would drink a sip of the ābbāsids.
And that simple physical act symbolizes their transition and their profound personal commitment to the Shia Ismāʿīlī Imam.
So it's an act of purification, but one that centers allegiance on the living authority of the Imam, not on older caste structures or ancestral ties.
Precisely. In the esoteric sense, drinking the water is understood as the soul's experience of unity, of tawad, where it embraces the nur, the divine light of the Imam. The physical act of drinking, the zahir, facilitates that inner spiritual reality, the banan.
A total integration. And after this moment of unity, there's a communal offering of sweet food, which is also heavy with symbolism.
It is. It's a moment of celebration and instruction. The sources say it must have 5 specific ingredients: milk, sugar, clarified butter, wheat flour, and water.
And each one means something.
Each one signifies a moral or spiritual trait. Milk is for purity, sugar for generosity, clarified butter for cooperation, wheat flour for moral strength, and water for spiritual seeking. It uses the simplest parts of daily life to teach the highest virtues of the faith.
Incredible. Okay, finally, let's go to Central Asia, where the focus on divine light is carried forward in a rite for the transition out of life.
Yeah.
The Charo Roshan.
The luminous lamp ceremony, or Dawarifana, the summons of demise. It's a profoundly sophisticated and comforting funeral rite, usually performed at dawn on the 3rd day after a death.
And the visual of kindling a light, the chura, seems to be the entire emotional and spiritual core of this rite.
It's the defining element. The light of the chura symbolizes the divine light, the nur, mentioned in the Quran, and specifically the continuous light of the imamat. In the middle of grief, the light is meant to illuminate both the present world for the mourners and the hereafter for the departed soul. It's spiritual guidance for the soul's journey.
So it connects the soul's final passage directly back to the doctrine of the imamat. The light guides the faithful even in death.
Yes, the chura itself symbolizes the continuity of the imamat through the living imams, ensuring that the guidance, the talim, is never broken. The ceremony powerfully reinforces that the spiritual connection that defines an Ismāʿīlī's life is carried forward into eternity.
You also mentioned the sources contrast this with a ritual called Dawadi Baka.
The summons of eternity. It's a separate ritual performed during an individual's lifetime. It's expensive, so it's not common, but it's doctrinally vital. It's a thorough cleansing and purification of the soul.
So like a spiritual pilgrimage you can take without ever leaving home.
That's a great way to think of it. Conceptually, it's like a spiritual hajj, a proactive measure to make sure the soul is ready to embrace the Aqwa before death. Both ceremonies reinforce that quintessential Ismāʿīlī quest, the lifelong journey from the physical Zahiri world to the spiritual world of the Aqwa.
The journey from that austere fortress of Alamut to these incredibly diverse global rituals is just a testament to the tradition's adaptability. But when the state itself was shattered in 1256, How did that essential knowledge survive 600 years of deep concealment to become the global community we see today?
Well, the resilience of the Nizārī community is a story of profound intellectual resourcefulness and strategic adaptation. And if we go back to Alamut one last time, we have to fight the image of it as just a military barracks.
It was a place of militant austerity, yes, but also of intense intellectual pursuit.
Exactly. Despite the constant conflict and isolation, the Nizārī strongholds were centers of learning. They established impressive libraries.
Libraries filled with their own complex philosophy, but also scientific works, astronomical charts, classical philosophy.
Right, and we know this because famous Muslim scholars of the time, like Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, a polymath who made huge contributions to astronomy and math, lived and studied under Nizārī patronage for decades.
That's such a powerful contradiction to the common story, that a sect known for assassinations was also fostering advanced intellectual thought.
It reinforces their commitment to equal the intellect as a necessary partner to Ruh, the spirit. They weren't anti-intellectual at all. They just argued that intellect alone couldn't find ultimate truth without the Imam's guidance. And this high value on knowledge meant that when their physical fortresses fell, the intellectual tradition, the real spiritual treasure, survived.
And that intellectual flexibility was key to those centuries of concealment, the taqiyya we discussed. We saw how they used the cloak of Sufism in Persia, but it got even more complex and syncretistic in the Indian subcontinent.
The Indo-Muslim environment is fascinating. It just showcases their mastery of cultural blending. Their association with Sufism went way back, but in the Indus Valley, persecution forced Shia thought to adopt this very effective, convenient Sufi garb for survival.
And the sources highlight this complex interaction in Multan between the local Ismāʿīlīs under Pir Shams and the established Suhrawardi Sufi order.
Yes, led by Baha al-Din Zakariya. He was a pillar of the establishment with immense political and spiritual influence. It's generally understood that the Ismāʿīlī mission under Pir Shams could only have flourished there with Zakariya's full awareness and maybe even his tacit protection.
So Pir Shams developed this highly syncretistic path, the Sat path or true path.
Yes, which basically let the Ismāʿīlī core message be delivered within a local Indian context, using concepts familiar to a mostly Hindu audience.
It was a remarkable achievement in adaptation.
It is. It used shared metaphysical ideas between Indian and Iranian cultures. For example, it often framed the Ismāʿīlī Imams as the 10th avatar of Vishnu, making allegiance to the Imam intelligible and acceptable within a Hindu cosmology. This tolerance for flexibility in the outer culture, the Zahir, while keeping one unwavering spiritual reality, the Bun, is maybe the most enduring characteristic of their legacy.
And this ability to survive by adaptation has led to the modern community structure. What does the global Nizārī community even look like today?
The modern community, millions strong across 25 countries, is really distinct because of its centralized hierarchical structure under the living Imam, the Aga Khan. This is a huge contrast to most decentralized Sunni groups. The Imam provides continuous guidance, establishing constitutions and councils worldwide to manage everything from education and health networks to global development projects.
And what are the physical hubs that maintain this global identity?
The Jamaat Khanas. They serve as the community's physical and spiritual centers. And while they're like mosques, they have distinctive features. For instance, in Nizārī Jamaat Khanas, men and women typically pray together, emphasizing gender equality and spiritual practice.
And I imagine the liturgy itself also reflects that history of adaptation.
It does. It's dynamic. It includes devotional poetry and songs, like the Jinans in the subcontinent in local languages, right alongside the traditional Arabic prayers. This active integration of local culture keeps the esoteric truths accessible and relevant to a global multilingual community.
So we established that the essence of Ismāʿīlī faith is this synergy of the spiritual and the material. How does that ancient philosophical quest for haqiqa translate into the everyday life of a modern Ismāʿīlī?
It manifests in their strong ethical framework and the central concept of khidma, or service. The modern Ismāʿīlī identity is all about striving for balance between the spiritual and material dimensions of life. The Imam encourages followers to apply their ethics, knowledge, justice, compassion, self-reliance to solve real global issues.
So khidma isn't just charity, it's a spiritual duty.
Exactly. Transforming that esoteric insight, the Bun, into tangible practical action, the Zahir serving the community and humanity, is seen as a direct extension of their spiritual obligation. The community operates with this incredible internal solidarity, symbolized by the title they use for their leader, Maulana Har Imam, our Lord, the present Imam. It signals a protective, immediate leadership that connects ancient spiritual guidance directly to modern humanitarianism.
So the secret wisdom of the mountain fortresses has become a global force for development.
In essence, yes.
What an incredible journey we've taken. From the dangerous secrecy of the mountain fortresses and the radical transcendence of the Qiyamah, through the terrifying rites of West Africa, the communal commitment of the Gapat ceremony, and the comforting light of the Central Asian funeral rites.
A lot to cover.
It is. But this is a tradition that defined its survival by its unwavering loyalty to living guidance and its incredible intellectual flexibility.
And I think the story of the Ismāʿīlī tradition shows us that religion can be a living, continuously unfolding reality. It affirms that the journey to know God isn't just passive adherence to static laws, but a dynamic, active path of enlightenment marifa that consistently seeks the deeper, immutable truth, the haqiqah.
The Nizārī quest, from the very beginning, was defined by that effort to journey from the physical Zahiri world to the spiritual world of haqiqah. The true treasure that survived the sieges, the Mongol destruction, the centuries of forced concealment, it was never the fortress walls or the libraries.
Whoa.
It was the ability to see the Nur, the light of truth, shining through the world, often disguised in the garb of local customs or mystic terminologies.
And that ability to see the hidden within the visible, to perceive the spiritual essence of material action, that's an enduring form of wisdom that requires constant training.
So we'll leave you with this final, provocative thought, drawing on that deepest insight of the Ismāʿīlī faith. They train their followers to look past the surface reality and seek the esoteric heart of existence. What enduring wisdom, hidden beneath the zahir, the rigid or distracting surface of your own daily life, your own codified laws and habits, are you yet to fully recognize? What light is shining in the midst of your familiar world that you have been trained to overlook?
Thanks for tuning into Sonara's Deep Dive. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of our future episodes. I bring you fresh content every week. Thanks for listening.